So, ooh, okay, I just got a thing. So, the CSNS came about because, as I said, there were just so many things that weren't being addressed. The parent organizations, the AANS and the CNS, were doing a great job of making sure that we knew all about advances in tumor work and stereotactic work and spine work. But as practices got to be ever more complex and the regulatory world got more complex and hospitals became bigger, the CSNS has always been the voice that allowed us to know what we needed to do, know what the trends in healthcare were, and to advocate for neurosurgery. Our purpose is that the CSNS is a representative, deliberative, and collaborative organization of delegate neurosurgeons in training and in practice that exists to influence and affect socioeconomic policy of organized neurosurgery for the benefit of our patients and neurosurgery as a whole. And I was happy to see that a lot of you sort of included patients in as like the sort of end product of what we're looking to do. We also serve as a resource for socioeconomic knowledge and education for our colleagues on all issues of that I've talked about. We also do this for regulatory and healthcare officials as well as legislative representatives. So this speaks to our educational element and our advocacy element. We provide a conduit for new initiatives, concerns, and issues to be brought to the AANS and CNS for response and action. So we're very much an action-oriented organization. And we also provide an environment for developing leaders in healthcare policy and advocacy. So almost everybody that serves on the Washington Committee has spent time in the CSNS, the people who had coding and reimbursement committees, the FDA committees, and various other positions, including things like guidelines, oftentimes have been trained by their time in the CSNS. We are democratic, we are deliberative, and we have a lot of work products. So we're not sort of just a sit around and shoot the bull type organization. And how we're comprised is that what state representatives represent 2/3, and this is neurosurgical population based. So it's very much like, the House of Representatives, except for we're not based on the population of people, we're based on the population of neurosurgeons. And you can argue it one way or another, but that's how it is. There are also a set number of appointees that come from the AANS and from the CNS, and they represent the other third, essentially. We have resident fellows, of which there are 12, and then we have a military fellow. One is chosen between the three arms of the military. Anybody can come to our meetings, anybody can participate in our meetings, but only these people who I've noted can actually vote. We have non-voting members specifically from the Neurosurgical PA Society, from the Neurosurgical MP Society, and from NERS, which are the Practice Administrator Organization, which in fact was created by the CSNS, and we work very closely with them. Our officers currently are that we have a chair, a vice chair, treasurer, a recording secretary, a corresponding secretary, an historian, and a past chair. Sorry, my thing is going a little crazy here. This is in the process of being revised. So the next time I give this talk, I suspect this list will be slightly different. Currently, everybody serves a 2-year term. We're also looking to possibly change that to slightly shorter tenure. We have standing committees, medical legal, which is, covers malpractice, but it also includes all other legal related issues. Workforce, the number of neurosurgeons and how we can make that optimal. Reimbursement and coding goes along with that. Medical practices, neurotrauma and emergency neurosurgery. And I would point out that this isn't so much the science of that or the practice stuff, but it's more related to policy, on-call regulations, that sort of thing. And then we have a patient safety committee. You can well imagine that a lot of the topics that we cover span more than one of these committees. And so it's frequent that we work together, members of these different committees. There's some special committees. The nominating committee, nominates the officers and people for positions of leadership. Rules and regulations is like our bylaws committee. We call it rules and regs instead of bylaws. The awards committee is chaired by yours truly, the historian, and there's 2 major awards that go out every year. Long-range planning tries to keep the CSNS vibrant and appropriate for the future. And then we also have a leadership development group. Finally, we have neurosurgeons as medical directors. The CEC, which is probably the largest committee, which has subcommittees that related to website publications and public relations. This addresses anything as it relates to getting the word out, sharing our knowledge. So they work with our parent organizations to organize lectures and courses for their national meetings. They also help to plan educational things at our meeting. They put out white papers about critical topics. This is a great committee for all of you to be involved in because it's a very, if you're on this committee, it's a very prominent committee. You get your names on papers, you get your names on, you get to teach in courses or be on panels and courses. So this is a really, really good committee for you to participate in. The young physician section, and we've just sundown the senior neurosurgeon section, which is probably a good thing. The quadrants are broken up into Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, and Southwest. Funny that it's not like they cut the country in quarters. They divided them up so that all the quadrants are essentially the same size. The Southwest, which includes California and Texas, doesn't involve a whole lot of other states because those 2 states are very large. Fortunately, not fortunately, serendipitously, most of the states between those 2 are pretty small. New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, etc. The executive committee really drives all the processes, but ultimately the resolutions and whatever are voted on, but the executive committee really makes things hum. Sitting on that, in addition to the officers, are the heads of all the quadrants, the quadrant chairs, all those committees that I talked about, the chairs of those committees sit on the EC, as do the caucus chairs from the AANS and CNS. The regional directors sit there. There's a delegate from NERS. There's a resident fellow on it. And so it's a pretty representative committee. Now, none of you have been to a meeting yet, so some of this may seem a little bit strange, but when you come to the meeting, and it depends actually whether it's the CNS or the AANS, what day it is on now. It used to be the same, but now it varies a little bit. But the first session that you come to, the first plenary session, brings everybody together. The officers all give reports and updates. There may be special reports if there's something critical going on, or if there was something that was mandated at a prior meeting that had to be reported on. And then all of the resolutions that are submitted get discussed, and there's testimony on that. After there's testimony, a group called the reference committee goes back and muses over what everybody said. And the next day, they're going to bring recommendations whether the resolution should be changed, ditched, or accepted. Now, you don't have to take the reference committee's recommendations, and we go back into discussion about that, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Also, all of those committees that I talked about, almost all of those will meet. Then the next day, all the caucuses meet, all of the quadrants meet, and then we all come back again into a session and we do resolution debate. Oh, what a typo, sorry. And we vote on it, and this all follows parliamentary process. So if you don't know anything about parliamentary procedure, I would strongly recommend you kind of do a little, parliamentary procedure 101 before you come to the meeting, so you know how to use it. My computer is thinking on its own today. There, again, are some more special reports, and then always the Washington Committee gives us a really critical update. We get reports from our 2 parent organizations, and then it all usually ends with a nice lunch that almost everybody attends, including oftentimes the leadership of the CNS and AANS, and there's a guest speaker presentation which is on a topic of importance and is usually timely. Now, to give you a little bit more information about what a resolution is, it's not quite like a law, but it's very similar. Resolutions can be submitted by individuals, by the state, by a quadrant, or by the committees. There's a deadline about 6 weeks before every meeting, and if your resolution isn't in by then, it won't be considered. They're assigned to committees based on their content and their relevance to those committees. And those committees meet ahead of the meeting, and then they submit their recommendations about whether they think it's a good resolution, a bad resolution, whether it needs to be changed. And that's a lot of what drives the plenary discussion. We've recently instituted something where the reference committee, which are the ones who are going to later consider all of our testimony, they go through the resolutions and they make sure that if they're duplicate ones, that they're combined, that they meet the rules of how to do a resolution. So they really help the process along by cleaning up the resolutions. And after the discussion, like I said, they go to the reference committee. These are representatives from all the quadrants and caucuses and the vice chair, and they discuss what the testimony said and what the will of the body is, and then they make recommendations. Now, despite the fact that they make the recommendations, everything comes back to the plenary for additional comments and changes. During the first debate, you can't actually change the resolution, but during this final plenary debate, you can amend the resolutions, you can add things, you can take things out, you can change the wording. And then every resolution ends up in an action. And sometimes that action is a survey, sometimes it's a letter, sometimes it's developing a white paper, sometimes it's engaging a luncheon speaker or giving a report at a future meeting. But everything has to have an action. We don't have resolutions that just say, you know, we love motherhood and apple pie, so isn't that great? That would not be a resolution that we would ever consider, not because we don't like motherhood and apple pie, but there's really no action that is associated with that. As I said, that when the caucuses and the committees deliberate on them, they can say that they support it, that they want to amend it. Sometimes you are allowed to have editorial changes, which means, you know, if there's a typo or if there's some change that's really just a matter of semantics, you cannot support it and you can offer a complete substitution. In the plenary session, the same sort of things apply, except for you can also defer it to committee or table it. Deferring it to committee technically will bring it back the next time for discussion after the committee has reviewed it and possibly changed it. Tabling it kind of kills it, but in a gentler, kinder way. And then ultimately there's a vote by the delegates. What the resolution has is a title. Up till this point, the title has not been able to be changed. So I would caution everybody to choose their titles carefully. People have oftentimes chosen titles that don't really reflect the content of the resolution, or ones that are quite inflammatory. If they are inflammatory, people may vote the resolution down because they don't want the title to be published. You have to put the authors, and then you have a series of whereas clauses. These are kind of like saying, you know, why you think this is important. So, you know, apple pie has been around in the US for many, many years, and we serve it every year at Thanksgiving. Apples are, you know, a real American sort of thing, and they're delicious when they're made into apple pie, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, be it resolved that we declare that apple pies, along with motherhood, will be the symbol of the CSNS. Probably not going to happen, but the whereas clauses lay out the rationale for what the resolution says. The whereas clauses are not contained in the final published resolution, so sometimes people put a lot of time into them, and it's good to put down your rationale, but sometimes people have 2 or 3 pages of whereas clauses, and I can tell you that most people won't read that. So keep them brief and to the point. The resolve clauses can be one or several. Keep them as brief as possible, but obviously only as brief as they can be to get the appropriate content and message across. You have to have a fiscal note associated with it, even if that fiscal note is zero. But do understand that even things like surveys cost some money. And then you can have either an internal action, that is, write a white paper, give a report, do a survey, or you can request that one of our parent organizations do something. You cannot request that the ABNS or the RRC or the Society of Neurologic Surgeons or the Washington Committee do something. You can ask the AANS and the CNS to ask the Washington Committee or ask the AMA or put a resolution in front of the AMA, but we can't make that request directly because we're subsidiaries of the AANS and the CNS. Good resolutions are focused, they're doable, they're clear, and they're applicable to what's going on in neurosurgery now. I'm just going to go back. So I'm going to just give you a couple of examples. I mean, there was recently a resolution that was talking about the border wall. And you might say, well, what does the border wall have to do with neurosurgery? And if the resolution had been written or submitted as it was originally written, which was somebody who really felt passionately that neurosurgeons should speak out against the border wall, you know, when I was asked to review this, I told him that I said, you know, you may feel passionately about that, but it doesn't really have anything to do with neurosurgery. You have to link it somehow to neurosurgery. And he says, well, one of the reasons I feel so passionately about it is that I'm living and working in San Diego, and we've seen a dramatic rise in spine and head injuries in areas where the wall has been built above a certain height. I said, now you have something that you can focus on. So placing the border wall in a public health issue as it relates to neurosurgery is something that is appropriate for us to consider. But just the notion of, you know, the border wall probably would have been inappropriate. We've had similar resolutions as they relate to things like firearms and handguns, because there's such a preponderance of head injuries and spine injuries that are related to these. So they have to be made appropriate to neurosurgery, and just a couple examples for that. A successful CSNS delegate, of which you're now one for the next year or so, shows up, you're on time, you're not late, you participate. The people who sit around and look at their phone the whole time and are doing all kinds of things like preparing their talk for the next day, you're not really there, you're not present, and therefore, you know, you're just not going to be seen as somebody who's engaged. If you do volunteer for something, make sure you complete it, or if you can't complete it for some reason, things change in your residency or something happens at home, you know, notify the people who you said you'd get it done that you don't think you're going to be able to meet the deadline. You're not going to be able to complete the task, and this is why. Can I have more time? Or I think you better assign it to somebody else. It just, things haven't worked out the way, you know, you hoped it would. We also hope that our CSNS delegates will report back, talk to your staff, your faculty, your fellow residents, and if you have the opportunity to go to a state neurosurgical society meeting or go to an educational program with other residents, talk about what's going on at the CSNS, talk about what you're doing, talk about what the organization's doing, so that more and more people are aware of what we're doing and of the importance of what we do. So encourage awareness of the CSNS, and also you learn how to network effectively so that you can find great projects to work on. You can make lifelong colleagues, whether they be with the residents or with other neurosurgeons. It's one of the best opportunities to get connected to senior neurosurgical leadership and people that you might wait another 5 or 10 years to be able to really interact with and work on projects with. So it's a fabulous, fabulous opportunity for networking, and you should try to take every opportunity for that. Is it worth the effort? I think that there's probably huge rewards for being involved in the CSNS than just about anything you would do in organized neurosurgery, because it genuinely brings action for patients, for neurosurgeons, and for all of our specialty. It's representative and timely issues can be discussed and acted on. It really has been a training for future leadership. I went on to be vice president of the AANS. Other people have gone on to be president of the AANS, head of the Washington Committee, president of the CNS, because you can really observe leadership and have an opportunity to be involved in leadership at a very, very early stage. And as I said before, it gives you early access to senior neurosurgeons. So with that, I will stop sharing and see what questions do you have about how we're structured